Have you ever purchased some paints or a new medium or received a gift of a medium that you've never tried before and you don't know where to start? Then you're in the right place, because in today's video, I'm going to show you a few simple exercises that'll help you become acquainted with a new medium. Welcome to my channel. My name is Kristina Moyer and I'm an artist specializing in acrylic paints, but I don't let that stop me from trying other mediums and playing around. I love to draw as well. So you'll see all kinds of different art related inspirational type videos that'll help you along your artistic journey, or if you just enjoy looking at how I create my art, and hopefully by learning from my processes and my experiences, it will help bolster up your own artistic abilities and skills going forward. So let's get started. This isn't gonna work for every medium, but it's gonna work for paints like watercolor, acrylic, gouache, as I'll be demonstrating, pencil crayons and pastels, things like that. That should work. If you have something like charcoal, India ink, that's just black, that's not really gonna work the same for this particular video. We'll save that for another video. Are you ready for this? Okay, grab your art medium, pull it out, take a look at it. Take a look at the container that it's in. There might be some information that gives you some insight as to how this is going to perform, and maybe give you some ideas like that it's water-based. It's fast drying, watercolor-like effects, solid color. So there's different things I can do with it. So I can maybe make it kind of like watercolors, or is it going to act more like acrylics? We'll find out as we experiment. I have all these colors listed, and the little circle tells me if it's transparent or semi-transparent or opaque. So it's giving me some ideas. So pulling it out now, just get them all out. These are small tubes. Just thought I would experiment, give this a try, because I'd heard about it and I hadn't really played with it. It wasn't something we did in school. I had never tried them before, so I thought, let's grab them, let's give it a go. So you can take out one of the tubes or whatever you have, and just have a look at it, see if you need to do anything when you twist it off, and if you need to, sometimes they have seals on them, that kind of thing. So just make sure it's all ready. So just open some and see if you need to do anything extra, or if it's just ready to go. These ones are ready to go from the tube. I think I have opened them once before, but I don't have extensive experience with these. I'm going to grab something to paint on, and I'm going to use my sketchbook. I recommend grabbing a sketchbook if you don't have one, or if whatever your medium isn't going to work for a sketchbook, then grab something that will work for that. Whether it's, just a paper, some kind of art paper. I do recommend using something similar to what you can paint on, just to give yourself some ability to actually paint and not ruin. If it's just, loose leaf paper, it might not work out so well. Gonna need some water. I like having 2 water jars, a palette, just a plastic plate works for me. And I'm also bringing out my Micron number 3, and we're gonna play with that, 03 for that one. And some paint brushes, because I'm using paint, but if you're not using paint, you don't need that. So we're going to start with swatches. I love starting with swatches when it comes to a medium I'm not familiar with. This is, I think, the easiest way to become acquainted with a medium. It's more methodical than it is like artistic. It's just, okay, we're doing this step, then this step, then this step. And you don't even have to worry about being creative or making something beautiful. Like, just get to know this material. See who it is. Say hello. So I'm just making enough squares for the colors that I have. So go ahead and make your own chart based on how many colors you have. Then I'm going to label this page. Now, this might seem kind of like schoolwork, but this actually is super helpful. If you don't label this and also put in what brand it is. I have one of the pages in my sketchbook. I don't even know what brand it is, so it's really not that helpful. I'm going to put some information here just so I remember and I don't have to look at the box. So I'm writing down the name of the color, and then I'm putting down the little circle that tells me if it's opaque or if it's meant to be transparent. And I'm curious to see how well that translates as I use it. I'm leaving plenty of space below because I'm going to do some swatches below. So I highly recommend getting these Micron pens if you're considering anything like this, because they do not bleed. They're fantastic. If you like doodling and if you're just trying to make charts and things, they're really, really great pens to have. So check out the description if you're interested in getting some that I'm using. I'd love to have those on hand for whatever projects I'm working on. And even for sketching in the sketchbook, you can get different sizes. So now I'm adding extra lines in here. I'm not just going to do a single swatch. I decided I'm going to do a few different swatches that are going to help me when I'm working on projects. So you can put in as many as you want, depending on what you kind of want to experiment with. I'm putting in 3 per square. And then I'm also going to label them. I know this is seems maybe a little intense, but trust me, in the long run, this will be a resource that you can turn to, be so helpful, and you won't have to be guessing and everything. So I have a little P that tells me that's the pure color. I'm doing H2O. That's going to tell me that I'm just watering down that pure color. And then the W means mixing it with white. So what happens when it's just the pure color, if I'm mixing it with water, and then when I'm mixing it with white, I'm going to have this little chart that I can go back to whenever I want. And when I'm working with this medium, I can see exactly how it's going to turn out when I use those blends. Now, you can use a wide range of ratio when it comes to blending with your white. So you're going to have to take that with a bit of a grain of salt, but it gives you at least some idea of what's going to happen and how it's going to look. So I'm actually starting with white. It's not going to show up that well, but I'm doing quite a bit of white because I know I'm mixing white with a lot of other colors. So I'm doing a larger amount. You don't need very much of this particular if you're using the same medium that I am. And if you're using a different medium, you are going to have to go with whatever that is. So I'm going to look for a brush that fills up my little swatch pretty easily. Decided to go with this straight edge square one because it's going to give me those nice edges. And I decided to go with that. The round tip would have worked as well, but I know I would have made it a little bit more messy. So just a close-up on that brush if you want to check it out. I just got it at the Michaels here in Canada. So that's where I sourced that particular brush. And I always have my little rag on hand as well to dab off. I don't want to overflow things with all the water. So I'm just going to pull a little bit of paint onto my brush and go right into that pure section. And it's not going to show up very strong because it's just white on kind of a cream surface. But we're starting to experiment. We're starting to get to know how this works. Do I need to have more water on my brush? Do I need to have less? Can I use straight out of the tube, or do I need to have, more of a wet brush? Now I'm mixing in with some water for my little H2O spot. I'm going to have to zoom in for you guys to really see how it looks. So, and then with white, well, it already is white. So it's just, this one's a little redundant, but I just wanted to maintain that flow of, pure H2O white. Now this one you're going to be able to see. This is Scarlet. I'm going with the next row next rather than just to the right because it might still be a bit wet. So that's how I decided to, at least when I first start, I do it this way. And then I kind of decide it's okay to, because these dry actually so fast. So you'll start to get to know how they work and everything. Now, make sure you wash your brush if you're using a paint kind of thing, really kind of medium. Wash it really well in between colors. You don't want to have a muddy color for this particular use. You want this chart to be useful for yourself. It's a lot of work to make this chart, so you don't want it to be, muddy colors that were blended with other colors. So do wash out your brushes. That's why I have 2 water jars, and then I am going to clean it as it gets kind of dirty. So keep an eye on that. And then I'm just going to keep going with all the colors. So we're going to zip through all of these colors. You're going to take your time and do it, but have fun with it. and put on a podcast or something, or while you're listening to this, start swatching, and then you can do some of the other activities afterwards on your own. And yeah, just start adding in your colors. What you think it's going to look like might not be what it really looks like when you put it onto paper or put it onto canvas pad or whatever material you're using. If you're using watercolors, use watercolor paper, a watercolor pad or block. Use something that will be useful to you for your future reference. This sketchbook does have a really good weight to it, the paper, so it does hold paint fairly well. It's not going to be holding paint as well as canvas or wood block, but it holds it really well, and especially compared to like a sketch pad paper that's recycled, that kind of thing. So you can see what happens with adding water to the color versus adding white. Makes a huge difference, and it's going to be so helpful when I'm looking for a specific color and I already have this chart. I can just refer back to it. So I hope that this is helpful to you, that you can create your swatch chart for whatever medium that you're trying to get familiar with. If you need any help, place it in the comments. We can help you out. Okay, next up, we're going to experiment. Now, if you're using gouache, do not do this because this is a failed experiment, but that's okay. I didn't really think about the fact that these are similar to watercolors, and I would never use watercolor on a rock because it would just wash off. And you may already be cringing while you're watching this thinking, oh my goodness, that's not going to stay. What is she doing? But a couple things to note that's quite interesting. For one, you can kind of layer it. It did kind of layer, but once it gets wet, it's not going to stay. I don't think sealing this is going to be sufficient. Like if you used a spray varnish, I don't think it would be worth it. I would just use an acrylic on rock if I wanted to do this kind of application. So you're going to see, I'm going to wash it off, and what's left behind is quite interesting as well. It's my Posca paint pens. That black stays on the rock. So that just goes to show that it's not quite like acrylics. You're kind of this in between acrylics and watercolor here, and it's gonna wash off pretty easily. So gouache is not meant for rocks. There you go. It's not meant for that. It also, another thing is when your paint palette dries, you can re-wet it and use those again like watercolors. So I really love that about gouache, which you cannot do that with acrylics. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So the next exercise is to play. So if you have a spot in your sketchbook, maybe you did a scribble and you hadn't colored it in yet, or maybe you can do a scribble now. It doesn't take long. So feel free to do whatever you like. You can, follow a reference image to play. I find it's nice to kind of focus just on having these shapes to fill in, so I can experiment with different like gradients and blending colors. How well does it work with that? Can I layer things? Is it going to glaze? Can I make it thick, thin? How is it going to play together as I put it on the paper? Because I'm not just doing a tiny little square now. I'm, experimenting with blending colors and everything. So this is time to play. See if it works similar to another medium you already know that you might, if you have experience with watercolor, let's say, try some watercolor techniques with gouache if you're using gouache. So it's just dependent on what you already know and what medium you're using. How similar is it to that? See if it does anything similar to what you already know and try those techniques. I'm trying various things like with watercolor techniques, adding, some water onto the spot and then adding color in, or just going wet on dry and then letting things dry and then adding on is helpful. But what I found interesting right here is that it actually lifts still. And I don't know if it could be the lack of quality of this particular paper. So that's something interesting I found. So it's not quite like your watercolor, but it does give that kind of watercolor look to it.
So you can have that kind of transparent or translucent type of effect. And it does glaze really well. And if a spot next to it's wet, it's going to bleed into that, like you saw at the top bit of this. So I'm just playing around with random colors, not really overthinking any of this, just basically filling in the shapes that I have. So this is why I call it play, because I want you to just play, have some thoughts in mind as you play. Like I said, take some information you already have regarding another type of medium that might be similar, whether it's a wet or dry medium, and give that a go. See if it works. And it's okay if it doesn't. That's part of figuring things out in your sketchbook. So give that a go. And if you see something I've tried, give that a go too. So that's all in the fun of play. And then I'm also, as I start getting into it, I start to try to balance things out a little bit. If I see I've been doing some stripes, maybe I'll stick with a theme of stripes or some dots and color type of, balancing. If I see it's too warm on one side, I might try to cool it down or, go with some kind of theme, and then I'm pulling the background into it. So next up, how does it play with others? Can you layer it with something? So I decided that it looked a little sad on its own, that it needed a little extra, and I could try pastels. I could try something else. I could even do another layer of gouache on top, but I decided to kind of run with the doodle theme. So I decided to fill all of these little shapes with doodles. So some oodles of doodles here going on. And this is still very, loose, experimental, just going with the flow. And then sometimes I'll repeat a shape in a certain color to kind of give it some balance and harmony. Just have fun with it. That one to me reminds me of watermelon, so that kind of is how that one started rolling. So these pens worked really well for playing with gouache on top of them, and so I found that is good information for me to use in the future when I have a project that comes up, maybe for a greeting card for something, or just more doodle drawings and things. Or maybe if I'm traveling, I don't want to bring a lot with me, I'll have pages that are already painted with gouache, and then I can doodle on top of them when you're waiting for appointments. All these kinds of things. Fill it in. See how it plays with others. Does it play well? You kind of have to go with your gut. Try to listen to your instincts. See what it's telling you. If something looks a little off. And then don't forget to sign it and at least date it. If you don't want to sign it, at least give it a date so you know when you created it. So I made this on the first day of summer, so I'm going to put a little sun to represent the first day of summer. And that is the finished piece after experimenting with my gouache and having a little bit of fun and having a few failures too.
Well, how did you do? I want to know in the comments. Let me know about your experience. Do you feel more familiar with this new medium? I hope so, and I hope that you have some ideas of what you can do, new projects and things by working in that sketchbook, bringing it out, getting that practice in. Thanks so much for being here. If you enjoyed this, give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that little notification bell so you don't miss a thing. We'll see you next time. Take care.